Lady Louise Windsor did not raise her voice. She did not need to. In a room already tense with expectation, she looked toward Camilla and delivered the sentence nobody inside the royal circle expected to hear spoken so plainly. "You will never replace Queen Elizabeth in my heart." Then came the second shock. William stepped toward Louise instead of away from the controversy, making it unmistakably clear that the future king was standing beside her. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Louise understood the weight of what she had just done. This was not a careless remark made in passing. During a private Windsor family gathering, she had directly separated her love for her late grandmother from Camilla's place beside Charles. Queen Elizabeth II had been the reigning monarch before Charles, and for Louise, she was something even more personal, a grandmother whose memory carried warmth, duty, and identity. William's immediate movement toward her transformed grief into something larger. Camilla remained seated for several seconds. The Queen Consort, the title used for the wife of the reigning king, appeared stunned not only by Louise's words, but by the reaction that followed. Charles watched, Sophie watched, Edward watched, and William did not retreat. Louise was trembling, yet she did not apologize. She knew exactly whom she had challenged, but loyalty to her grandmother had overwhelmed the instinct to remain cautious. William moved closer and quietly placed a hand near Louise's shoulder. Then he said, "She is entitled to remember her grandmother exactly as she chooses." The prince did not attack Camilla. He did something more significant. He defended Louise's right to feel what she felt. Charles looked directly at his son, waiting for some sign that he might soften the position. None came. Sophie focused on her daughter, and immediately sensed that this had moved beyond grief. She understood that Louise was exposing a deeper tension inside the family, whether honoring Elizabeth's memory was somehow being treated as resistance to accepting Camilla's role. Edward stayed close as well, recognizing that his daughter had crossed an emotional line she could not easily uncross. Charles finally asked everyone to remain in the room. That was when Louise delivered the admission that changed the entire meaning of the confrontation. She said this was not the first time someone had pressured her to soften the way she spoke about her grandmother. William's expression hardened, and once Louise revealed that someone had already asked her to change the way she remembered Queen Elizabeth, William's decision to stand beside her suddenly looked far less spontaneous and far more deliberate. Saved for upcoming sections, faster delivery is the priority, and slight word count variation is fine. The confrontation mattered because this was never simply about one sentence. For Louise, Queen Elizabeth was not an abstract symbol carved into history. She was her grandmother. For William, she represented stability, duty, and the final link to a childhood shaped by both privilege and loss. For Camilla, however, Elizabeth's shadow created an impossible comparison, and Louise's words had just dragged that comparison into the open, where nobody could quietly manage it anymore. Louise carried memories that had nothing to do with crowns or constitutional duty. She remembered Windsor, quiet family conversations, shared affection for horses, and the rare privilege of knowing Elizabeth first as a grandmother before fully understanding what it meant that she was also the monarch. A monarch is simply the sovereign at the head of the royal institution, but to Louise, that title could never replace the private relationship beneath it. Sophie saw that pain immediately. Her daughter clasped her hands tightly, trying to contain emotions that were no longer only anger. William carried Elizabeth differently. He knew that every future decision he made would eventually be measured against the standards she had set over decades. That made him especially sensitive whenever her legacy seemed to be softened, reshaped, or used to smooth over tensions in the present. His instinct to support Louise came from more than sympathy. He understood the fear that remembering Elizabeth honestly could somehow be treated as disloyalty to Camilla. Camilla admitted as much privately to Charles. She told him the sentence itself had hurt, but William standing beside Louise had hurt more. The Queen Consort saw his gesture as a ranking of loyalties, one that placed Elizabeth's memory and Louise's grief above her need for reassurance. Charles listened carefully, but he could not pretend his son's response had been random. Edward gave Sophie the missing piece. He admitted Louise had been troubled for weeks by subtle conversations, encouraging younger royals to use warmer language when discussing Camilla's place within the family. Sophie immediately understood why her daughter's reaction had carried such force. Worse, William had already heard fragments of those conversations before the gathering. That changed everything. Sophie closed the drawing room door later and sat opposite William without aides or advisors. She told him about one Windsor ceremony where Louise had left deeply upset after a conversation linking Camilla's position to how younger members spoke about Elizabeth. "This began weeks ago," Sophie said. William's expression hardened. That private warning led straight back to the ceremony everyone had tried to forget, the exact moment when Louise first decided that silence was becoming a form of surrender. Weeks before Louise confronted Camilla, there had been another Windsor moment, smaller, quieter, and almost invisible to everyone outside the family. Yet that afternoon became the trigger for everything that followed. A memorial planning ceremony honoring Queen Elizabeth had ended with Louise standing alone beside a corridor window, fighting tears after being told that certain language about her grandmother should be balanced to reflect the monarchy's new reality. That single phrase changed the way she saw the entire situation. Louise had entered the private planning session believing she was there to contribute something personal. The Windsor Remembrance Ceremony was intended to honor Elizabeth's life, and a remembrance ceremony is simply a formal event created to preserve the memory of someone who has died. Family members and senior household representatives were invited to shape the tone. Louise prepared a short tribute centered on the woman she had known as Granny, the emotional center of her childhood, not merely the sovereign remembered by the country. The pain came afterward. Louise was quietly encouraged to soften parts of the tribute, so it would not appear to place Elizabeth emotionally above Camilla's present position. Nobody directly ordered her to stop loving her grandmother. That was precisely what made the request so unsettling. The language sounded careful, almost harmless, yet to Louise, it carried a brutal implication. Even grief now required adjustment. Sophie found her daughter shortly afterward, eyes wet and jaw clenched. Louise fought to stay composed before finally saying, "They're asking me to edit how I loved Granny." Her mother understood immediately. Sophie knew this was not a dispute over ceremonial wording. It was about whether private memory was being forced to serve public hierarchy. William learned about the exchange later through Sophie's private account, and his anger was immediate but controlled. He believed a line had been crossed between constitutional respect and emotional obedience. Constitutional respect means recognizing the official roles of the monarch and other senior royals. It does not require anyone to rewrite personal affection. William asked who had authorized the suggestion. The answer was murky. Sophie explained that Camilla's household had strongly supported more unified language around royal continuity, the idea of presenting the monarchy as one uninterrupted institution, despite changes in who occupies its senior roles. That did not prove the Queen Consort had personally dictated Louise's wording, but it was enough to make William uneasy. He chose not to confront the matter then. Instead, William folded Louise's original tribute, placed it flat on the table, and looked directly at Sophie. Nobody should have to rewrite grief for protocol. Then he made a promise. If Louise was pressured again, she should speak freely. He would not leave her standing alone. So when Louise finally spoke at Windsor, William was not making a sudden choice, he was fulfilling a promise. And Camilla was about to realize exactly what that promise meant. The room had barely recovered from Louise's declaration when Camilla turned toward William. Her shock had hardened into something more controlled, more dangerous. She did not ask Louise to apologize. Instead, she directed one question at the man standing beside her. "What exactly are you defending?" The future king did not look away. What followed was the confrontation the family had avoided for years, a clash between position, memory, loyalty, and emotional legitimacy. Charles moved quickly to contain the damage, asking everyone present to keep the exchange private. The king understood that one emotional argument could become far more dangerous if it escaped the family. Camilla, however, was no longer focused on discretion. She believed William's decision to stand beside Louise had transformed a personal statement into something dynastic, a signal about loyalty within the line of succession, meaning the formal order determining who is expected to inherit the throne. William answered carefully. He told Camilla he was not challenging her constitutional role or questioning the duties she performed beside Charles. He was defending Louise's right to separate royal office from private love. Elizabeth had been her grandmother. That emotional place could not be transferred simply because the monarchy had entered a new reign. Camilla's restraint finally cracked. She told William that she had spent years living beneath comparisons she could never win. Every ceremony, every public gesture, every attempt to serve seemed to return to the same impossible standard. Louise's words, she admitted, made her wonder whether acceptance would always remain just beyond reach. Louise interrupted before William could answer. Her voice shook, but she refused to retreat. She told Camilla the statement had never been intended to erase her. It was meant to stop other people from erasing Elizabeth. Sophie immediately moved closer to her daughter, while Edward stayed beside them, recognizing that Louise was defending memory rather than attacking rank. Camilla stood and faced William directly. Then she asked the question that forced him to remove every layer of careful wording. Did he personally agree with Louise? William paused. Nobody replaces her. That does not mean nobody else can serve. Charles slowly set down the pen he had been holding. The king warned his son that the distinction might be emotionally honest, but honesty alone could destabilize a family already struggling with competing loyalties. William did not deny the danger. He argued that pretending those loyalties did not exist was more dangerous still. Camilla remained silent. Louise stayed between Sophie and Edward, while William held his father's gaze. Charles finally asked his son to speak with him alone. He wanted to know exactly what authority the future king believed he was exercising. And behind that private summons lay the real question nobody could avoid any longer. When emotion collides with hierarchy inside a monarchy, whose judgment actually carries the greater weight? William did not possess the crown, but in that room, everyone understood that he possessed something almost as powerful, the certainty of eventually inheriting it. Charles could command the present. William embodied the future. And when father and son spoke alone after Louise's declaration, their disagreement revealed a fault line deeper than Camilla's hurt feelings. It exposed two radically different ideas about how the monarchy should protect itself when private truth threatens public unity. Charles reminded his son that any disagreement involving Camilla carried consequences beyond family emotion. The queen consort is the monarch's wife, and when the heir appears to oppose her, even a private dispute can be interpreted as a struggle over authority. The king warned that William's intervention beside Louise could easily be read as choosing one side of the family against another. He had spent too many years defending Camilla's place to ignore what that symbolism might unleash. William refused to reduce the matter to appearances. The prince argued that his responsibility also extended to younger relatives, being asked to reshape private feelings for the sake of palace messaging. He told Charles that loyalty could not be manufactured. Louise could respect Camilla's position without being pressured to elevate her emotionally into Elizabeth's place. Any attempt to force that comparison, he warned, would create resistance rather than unity. Charles felt the old wounds reopen. Defending Camilla had shaped much of his adult life, and hearing his son challenge the consequences of that effort left him feeling cornered. Yet William was equally affected. He insisted that the problem was not affection for the queen consort. It was the idea that protecting her required editing someone else's grief. Charles walked toward the window and fell silent. Then he made an admission that changed the direction of the argument. He had never ordered anyone to alter Louise's tribute. The king's frustration shifted immediately. If he had issued no command, then someone else had allowed informal guidance to carry authority it did not possess. William already knew part of the answer. He told his father that Sophie had privately explained how the suggestion had traveled through informal household channels, rather than coming directly from the monarch. Household channels are the advisors and staff networks through which royal planning is discussed before formal decisions are made. That complicated Camilla's position without proving she had personally dictated every word. Charles turned away, pressed both hands against the edge of the desk, and spoke quietly. "I never asked for Elizabeth to be diminished." That sentence ended the argument and began something more serious. Charles ordered an immediate review of the wording guidance surrounding remembrance events connected to Elizabeth. But that sentence changed everything, because once Charles separated his own wishes from what had happened around Camilla's household, the first consequences began almost immediately. Camilla entered the evening believing Louise's declaration was the crisis. By nightfall, she understood that the real danger was the reaction it had triggered behind closed doors. Charles had ordered the remembrance guidance reviewed. William refused to withdraw his support. Sophie would not ask her daughter to apologize. And the Queen Consort suddenly faced an unbearable possibility. The attempt to protect her place in the monarchy had instead reinforced the very comparison she had spent years trying to escape. Charles moved first. The king ordered that no member of the family should be pressured to soften personal memories of Elizabeth, simply to make present-day language around Camilla feel more comfortable. Remembrance guidance, the internal advice used to shape wording at memorial events, would no longer be allowed to interfere with private grief. Sophie received another message soon afterward. Louise's original tribute could be restored exactly as she had written it. Louise read the decision and broke down. She did not cry because she believed she had defeated Camilla. She cried because something deeply personal had finally been returned to her without conditions. Sophie held her daughter and reminded her that defending Elizabeth's memory did not require hatred toward anyone else. Louise understood that distinction. Her anger had always been about being told how to feel, not about denying another woman's place beside Charles. Camilla received the same decision very differently. Alone with Charles, she asked whether William had forced his hand. The monarch answered carefully but firmly. His son had raised the issue, but the final decision was his. Nobody should have placed Louise in that position in the first place, and he would not pretend otherwise, simply to protect anyone from embarrassment. Camilla then learned something even more troubling. The wording suggestion was being traced through members of her own communications team, though there was still no evidence that she had personally drafted the instruction. A communications team is the group responsible for shaping public messaging and coordinating how royal positions are presented. That distinction protected her from direct blame, but not from responsibility for what had been done in her name. Camilla did not explode. She slowly removed a bracelet, placed it on the table, and told Charles she wanted every instruction issued under her authority reviewed. After he left, she remained seated beside it, absorbing the possibility that protecting her status had wounded someone who never intended to threaten it. Then she made one unexpected request. Camilla sent a private message to Louise asking to speak alone. The request placed Louise before a harder decision than speaking out in public whether she was willing to meet the woman at the center of her anger, without William, Sophie, Charles, or protocol standing between them. There were no aides in the room, no William standing protectively beside Louise, no Charles to defend Camilla, no advisors choosing safer words, just two women separated by generations, grief, history, and a sentence that had shaken Windsor. Camilla began the private meeting without demanding an apology. Instead, she asked Louise one painfully simple question. "Do you believe I am trying to erase her?" Louise's answer would transform the confrontation from a battle over status into something far more human. Louise had agreed to meet because Sophie had challenged her gently before she entered. Her mother told her that courage was not only about defending the right to speak, it also meant facing the person wounded by those words, and listening without surrendering what she believed. Camilla had requested the same simplicity. No aides, no constitutional language, no discussion about formal royal authority. This would be personal. Louise answered carefully. She told Camilla that Elizabeth could never be replaced in her heart, and she would not pretend otherwise. But the deeper fear was not about the Queen Consort herself. It was about the palace sometimes behaving as though loving her grandmother too openly had become inconvenient. That was what the altered tribute had made her feel, that grief was acceptable only when it fitted the needs of the present. Camilla listened without interrupting. She reached toward her teacup, then stopped before touching it. The admission came slowly. Living beside Elizabeth's legacy had sometimes made her defensive, she said, because every act of service seemed to invite comparison with a woman whose place in history was already secure. Camilla acknowledged that people around her may have reacted too aggressively to that pressure, trying to shield her from comparisons she could never fully escape. Then she said something Louise had not expected. Camilla told her she had never asked anyone to diminish Elizabeth, and would never support a demand that Louise rewrite her love for her grandmother. Louise heard the words, but she did not immediately soften. Trust had already been bruised. The turning point came only when Camilla spoke again. "I am not asking for her place." Louise held her gaze before answering. "Then don't let anyone ask us to give it to you." The boundary was unmistakable. Camilla could be respected without replacing Elizabeth. Louise could defend her grandmother without treating the queen consort as an enemy. When Louise finally left, William was waiting nearby. The prince searched her face for an answer. "We understood each other," she told him. Their conversation did not erase the conflict, but it changed its meaning, and by morning, the world outside Windsor had already transformed Louise's sentence into something far larger than either woman intended. By sunrise, a deeply personal family confrontation had become a national symbol. Some saw Louise as a granddaughter defending the woman she loved. Others saw Camilla trapped forever beneath the impossible shadow of a legendary monarch. And William's intervention became the image that dominated the debate. The future king standing beside a younger royal while refusing to treat private loyalty as disobedience. Then one extraordinary scene outside Windsor Castle captured the mood perfectly. Louise watched the story spread through broadcasters and newspapers with growing discomfort. What had begun as a private defense of her grandmother was now being framed as a debate about memory, succession, and whether honoring Elizabeth somehow weakened respect for the present monarchy. Succession is the formal order determining who inherits the crown, but the argument had moved beyond titles. It was now about whether a modern royal family could acknowledge complicated emotions without treating them as rebellion. William's role drew even greater attention. Commentators in this fictionalized account described his intervention as a glimpse of how the future king might balance institutional discipline with emotional honesty. Sophie found Louise staring at the coverage on her phone and reminded her of something simple. She had spoken about her grandmother, not launched a campaign against Camilla. Louise understood, yet becoming a symbol still felt unbearable. Camilla felt the pressure from the opposite direction. Headlines described the queen consort as living in Elizabeth's shadow, language that reopened the comparison she feared most. She told Charles the controversy made the family appear divided. The king disagreed with the instinct to conceal it. Pretending grief did not exist, he argued, would have created a deeper fracture than admitting that different relationships could carry different kinds of love. Then one newspaper front page changed the emotional direction of the story. A large image of William beside Louise appeared beneath the headline, "Her memory stands." It did not directly condemn Camilla, but its message clearly favored Louise's right to remember Elizabeth without apology. Outside Windsor Castle, the symbolism became even stronger. An elderly woman placed flowers beside a photograph of Elizabeth with a handwritten card, "No one replaces love." The image spread rapidly. Louise watched the footage, lowered her phone, and looked toward Sophie. "I never wanted this to become about choosing one woman against another." Sophie understood. So did Charles. Rather than answer the controversy with rival statements, the king approved one final decision. Louise would deliver her original tribute to Elizabeth, exactly as she had written it. That realization cleared the way for the only ending capable of settling the conflict, not a palace victory, not a humiliation, but a final act that defined exactly what Elizabeth's place, and Camilla's place, would now mean. The controversy ended where it had truly begun, with Louise speaking about her grandmother. This time, nobody edited her words. Nobody asked her to soften the emotion. William sat, knowing he had defended her right to remember. Sophie listened, knowing her daughter had survived the confrontation, without becoming consumed by it. Camilla understood something equally important. Accepting that Elizabeth could never be emotionally replaced did not diminish her own role. It simply acknowledged a truth the monarchy could no longer fear. Louise delivered the original tribute exactly as she had written it. She spoke of Queen Elizabeth as a grandmother, a monarch, a mentor, and an irreplaceable presence in her life. A monarch is the sovereign who formally leads the royal institution, but Louise's words made clear that Elizabeth had occupied a far more intimate place than any title could explain. Charles allowed every sentence to remain unchanged, establishing a simple family boundary. Succession could change offices, duties, and titles, but it could never command affection or rewrite memory. Louise reached one memory and briefly struggled to continue. Sophie caught her daughter's eye and gave a small, reassuring nod. That was enough. Louise steadied herself and finished without changing a word. The trusted mother understood that this was no longer about proving courage. Her daughter had already done that. This was about reclaiming something that should never have required permission. Camilla listened quietly. The queen consort did not challenge the comparison, and for the first time, that restraint gave her the dignity she had been searching for throughout the conflict. She accepted that Elizabeth's emotional place did not threaten her own position beside Charles. The king noticed the difference too. He no longer needed the family to pretend that respecting the present required weakening the past. William found Louise afterward, and told her she had done the right thing by speaking honestly. The prince also praised her for meeting Camilla privately, making clear that his support had never been rebellion against the queen consort. He had defended Louise because emotional truth inside the family deserved protection. Camilla approached Louise before the gathering ended. "Your grandmother deserved every word." Louise thanked her. No public apology followed. None was needed. Both women finally understood the boundary that had caused so much pain. Camilla had her place beside Charles, and Elizabeth's memory belonged to those who loved her. Louise folded the tribute and kept it. William walked beside her, while Camilla remained